Hey, this is Dan Rockwood with TechRaptor. Recently, we were able to interview Eloise Singer and Lucy Liu about their new VR game, The Pirate Queen, A Forgotten Legend. Take a look. And my first question is for Eloise. I was curious how this project got started, and what about Cheng-Chi's story do you really want players to take away when they experience the game?
Great question. So I first heard about the story because a friend of mine told me, and she said, "Did you know that the most powerful pirate in history was a woman?" And I couldn't believe it. And I had to go away and research and look into her story. And the more I looked into it, the more fascinated I was. And I learned that not only did she command 70,000 people during the lead up to the Opium Wars, but she paved the way for gender equality. And she made a code of laws that meant that men and women had to be treated equally on her ship. So I think for me, I really want players to take away the idea that not only did she become the most powerful pirate, but she really was at the forefront of making sure that men and women were being treated equally. And she came from a world where she was a courtesan, and she then rose to this position of such power that that in itself is a huge feat that shouldn't be forgotten from history, and it seemingly has. So to create a game where we get to allow audience to experience that and to experience her world is really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, I was excited to learn more about the story and kind of get a greater sense of everything that had gone on. And Lucy, my next question for you is in preparing for this role and voicing this character, was there any different approach to kind of preparing in the way that people would be embodying the character in a VR role versus any of your other on-screen or voice acting work, or was it kind of more typical of how you would approach a role?
That's a great question. I think for me, it was a learning curve because normally when you go into animation, sometimes by the end of the session, your voice is quite strained, and they usually try to keep all the screaming to the last 15 minutes. And for this one, it was so intimate and personal because the journey is also, it's very experiential, and you really want to be in somebody's ear. And so Eloise was able to kind of give me those notes and direct me in the right direction in terms of how, the quieter you are, the more powerful it is in that sense. And walking through the puzzle of the game, also understanding that um, the the writing in itself, you've got a short window, 2 to 3 hours, 2 to 4 hours to really walk through the game, is to sort of imbue the personality of that woman, of this pirate, um, without a lot of exposition. Because you don't want it to become too didactic. I mean, as it is, the game itself is based on real events. So that it, you just don't want to push that because I think the value of what people try to do in these games is try to escape. And so that's one thing that I also found was wonderful is that it's not a shooting game. It's not a game necessarily about, firing your weapons. It's a game of learning, but through experience and through intellect. And I like that the puzzles are also discovering pieces of history and how precise they were. And that's a great way to absorb history and to learn. I think for me, probably back in the day, it would have been I if I would have learned a lot more if it was through experience as opposed to just reading, from a book.
I think that's kind of exciting about VR as well, is that it is such an educational tool. It's really cool that I think the future of VR is going to be more and more about education and telling people literally like how they could step into this world and how informative it can be through doing something rather than reading it in the page of a book.
Amazing. Thank you. My favorite capabilities of VR have always been the educational aspects of it. And I think this game definitely succeeds in that way. This question can really be for both of you because I imagine you have your kind of unique perspectives on it. But for people who are playing who are not familiar with the story of Cheng-Shi, what do you hope players will take away from this experience?
I hope people will just be excited to learn more about her story and feel inspired about what they have discovered in the game. I think our game focuses on the night that she came to power, and looking at the factions and the world that she had to face at that time and the challenges that she had to overcome. And there's so much more to her story as well. And that's why it's so exciting that we're developing it into a franchise. But for me, it's just this idea that a woman became the most powerful pirate in history. And when we commonly think of pirates, we usually think of white men with a patch and a peg leg, and this wasn't the
Parrot
case. And a parrot.
and a hat with a skull and crossbones.
Yeah. And this wasn't the case. And the fact that we are defying those expectations and those stereotypes and demonstrating that this incredible woman from history was the most powerful leader on the South China Sea is phenomenal. And it's something that I'm really proud of and really excited that the game really does champion that.
I'm excited that, I have a son that's 8 and we don't play video games because I'm just sort of trying to stave that off for as long as I can. But I'm excited that this game exists because it's a great way to introduce him to something that I would feel like I could check that, mom box and think, okay, I'm not starting, because we don't even have Nerf guns at home, just to be part of something that is considered a game, but something that is a learning experience. Whether you know it or not, I don't know. I in some ways, I think, as I said earlier, technology can be so terrifying because you feel like you don't know enough about it. And it can be really addictive. But I think if there's something in it that we can take away, because we can't take away what's happening. So what are the positive benefits of it that we can align with? And I think knowing that it can go in this direction is kind of it makes you feel like you're part of something special, especially since it is, and I think Eloise said it earlier, there's most of the games are, I think it's 80% are male oriented. There's female characters is like a 20%, you know, out there that are really geared towards those lead characters. And so it's nice to have somebody that is not a made up character that's a female lead, that you can actually play and say, oh, well, this is something kind of interesting. And it happens to be, I don't know, something that you're learning about. Because I think everybody was like, oh, let me look into this a little bit more. Because the game gives you a very specific, experience in that night.
Mhm.
Right. And I'm sure that was really hard for you guys to figure out in that writer's room, like, what do we focus on? Like, should we take it from the beginning all the way to like, where do you go? And I think sometimes that's the hardest thing, to find what that seed is going to be that people are going to explore, because I think sometimes people jump from thing to thing, and usually it's just about combat, let's get through to the next, room. And this is a much more, I don't know, this is a different experience and therefore more challenging to find how that can move forward for players or for yourselves.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time and for meeting with us today.
It was our
Pleasure.
pleasure.
Thanks
Thanks,
so much for having
guys.
us.